everybody, this is Ben Mizrahi again, and today we're going to talk about Jewish evangelism in the 2nd and 3rd century. I'm not sure if we'll continue with the series about Jewish evangelism throughout history, because I had some beefs recently with the Jewish Messianic communities in Israel, and the article I was working on was basically for them. But since I got into a beef with them, not sure if there is anybody to give the article, to dedicate the article to. So I think I'm gonna discontinue with the article. Of course, I'm still gonna do videos. I have resources, I have ideas for new videos already. So I'll see what I will talk about next, and of course I'm open for suggestions. If you have a suggestion, I really encourage you to tell me about it in the comment section. I really encourage you. But anyway, I think I'm gonna discontinue with the current lecture series. Okay, so let's start with talking about the Jewish evangelism in the 2nd and the 3rd century. So, beginning the 2nd century, the tendency of the church that we spoke about already to preach mainly to the Jewish communities both in the land of Israel and abroad stopped. Okay? And because of that reason, we have very few primary and secondary sources that deals with this topic of Jewish evangelism in that period. That doesn't mean, by the way, that we don't have many primary sources, that we doesn't have many primary sources from Jewish Christians from that period. We have a lot of them, but many of them do not deal directly with evangelization or evangelism, but are geared toward internal expounding of theology. But anyway, regardless, efforts to evangelize the Jews were still continued by people such as Justin Martyr, who has written a book called Dialogue with Trypho the Jew. Now, this book is a great book in order to preach to the Jews. Now, in Hebrew, you can find the book at Magnus Press, translated by David Rokach. I wonder if he was connected with the Rokach who was the mayor of Tel Aviv back in the early days of the town. But that doesn't matter anyway. In English, there are many translations from the book. Of course, you can find it in the Anti-Nicene Fathers. In volume 1, I would have shown it to you, but unfortunately that book is currently used as a platform, so I can record this video, so I cannot show it to you. But anyway, just type Dialogue with Trypho the Jews. I'm pretty sure you can find it in English also as a PDF format. I mean, there's no copyright on the book anymore. Anyway, Dialogue with Trypho the Jews was written in the format of a debate on theological principles between Justin and a Jew named Trypho. Now, some scholars believe this Trypho is a famous Talmudic figure known as Rabbi Tarfon. Now, other people believe, other scholars, which is today's the majority view, believes that this Trypho was a fictional character invented by Justinians. You can read that debate in the book by Claudia Zerzer from 1994, Jewish Responses to Early Christians by Fortress Press on page 134. Anyway, even if this dialogue was an invention by Justin Martyr, we still learn from that the methods that were used in order to evangelize to the Jews in the 2nd century, which were based mostly on dialogue between Jews and Christians. I mean, between individual Jews and Christians, just like they would do in the Middle Ages, and on apologetic writings by Christians. Now we have the names of other such dialogues from that period, but unfortunately the writings themselves did not survive. We only have the names of them. Anyway, it's a very interesting fact, it's a fascinating fact that Justin brings in this dialogue his own testimony as a proof for the veracity of the Christian faith, which is something that can teach us today that the believer's personal testimony has great importance in terms of evangelizing, that might cause people to be interested in Jesus and in Christianity, and so began the evangelization process from a very great opening point where the other party is actually interested of hearing about Jesus, about our Christianity, and how we transformed our own personal lives. Now, another thing is that's interesting to see that this dialogue, I mean the dialogue we try for the Jew, which was written as a defense of Christianity against Judaism, and because of that, that dialogue is an important, very important tool in order to mine arguments against Judaism and for the belief in Jesus Christ. This dialogue is also a very important landmark in the history of Christian apologetic. Now you can read that in the book by Tessa Rajak, I hope I pronounced the name properly, from 1919, which called Talking a Trifle, Christian Apologetic as Anti-Judaism, in Justin's Dialogue with Trifle the Jew. Now that article is to be found in the anthology edited by Mark Edward, Martin Goodman, and Simon Price, called Apologetics in the Roman Empire, Pagan Christians and Jews, by Oxford University Press, pages 59 until 80. Now, the fact that it's such an important landmark in the history of Christian apologetic made it teach us that in spite of the decline in the efforts for Jewish evangelism, it still might be that the Jewish evangelism was seen as so important so that the early Christians felt the need to invent new forms and ways for evangelism just for that purpose. And it seems that Justin confirms the principles which we have learned from Peter and Paul in the beginning of this series of videos, namely anti-Judaism, preaching to both Jews and Gentiles, so on, especially the Jew preaching to both Jews and Gentiles at the same time. Justin Martyr did just that, and he actually wrote two separate books for Gentile evangelism called the First and Second Apology, respectively. Now, it also seems that Justin is accurately quoting post-Christian Jewish traditions, important post-Christian Jewish traditions, important rabbinic traditions about the Messiah, traditions that still exists in modern day Judaism, which basically what they're doing is that they're dwarfing the role of the Messiah, and they emphasize the humanity of the Messiah, and the fact that he is hidden from us and even from himself. You can read that in the book, in the article by A. Higgins from 1967 called Jewish Messianic Belief in Justin Martyr's Dialogue with Rifle, Novum Testamentum, Volume 9, Issue 4, on pages 298 to 305. Now, and besides that, Justin also tries to predict other arguments that were not raised yet by rabbinical Judaism, and this is why he actually hurry and put them in the Tryphos' mouth, even though these are not objections that actually reflects the Jewish objections to Jesus. You can read about it in the same article I just referred. It seems that Justin did to try both to answer current rabbinic Jewish objections to Jesus that were contemporary to him, and he tried to predict new possible future objections and try to answer them in advance before they were even raised, which is something I believe we should do today when evangelizing. We should both try to answer the current objection to Jesus, and of course Michael Brown did that in his excellent 5-volume series Answering Jewish Objection to Jesus, volumes 1 until 5. I'm proud to say I have all of them in the library. And we can try to think about what future arguments counter-missionaries, as the rabbinical Jewish fighters against Christianity are called. We can think about future arguments they could use and try to answer them in advance before they can raise it, so we catch them by surprise. Now, anyway, another primary source, even though if a bit indirect, that testifies to the efforts for Jewish evangelism during the 2nd, 3rd centuries is an essay called Against Celsus by Origen, which was not written as a Jewish evangelization essay or tract. It was actually written as a refutation of the claims of a pagan writer named Celsus, which apparently wrote a book against Christianity, who actually knows most of his argument because of that tract against Celsus, which quotes most of his book. So it's interesting that the book itself is lost, the original book that Celsus wrote, but we still know his argument just from the Christian writer that tried to answer them, Origen. But anyway, Origen, while trying to answer Celsus, also refers to the main points of controversy, the main points of disagreement between Jews and Christians in the Roman Empire. Um, you can read about that in the book by J.N. Sevenster from 1975 called The Roots of Pagan Antisemitism in the Ancient World, by Brill. That's the press. The thing is, Celsus actually brought some Jewish arguments against the faith to basically try to disprove this Christian faith by saying that the Jews who birthed the Christian faith themselves reject Christ. And Origen, of course, answered those arguments made by Celsus, and that's how we know some of the points of disagreements between Jews and Christians at that point, and how the Christians actually answer them in an effort to reach out and evangelize the Jews. So it's interesting that even debates between Christian and pagans contains helpful material for Jewish evangelism. Now in this point, it's also important to remind the people that the Gospels themselves are anti-Jewish, and so is the Christianity that evolves from the Gospels. By that I don't mean that the Gospels are anti-Semitic, of course not. 3/4 of them were written by Jews, besides all of them except the Gospel of Luke, which is probably the most neutral of the Gospel, by the way. They were opposed to the Jewish religion of the time, and of course the Gospel writer would have abhorred the rabbinical religion, the rabbinical cult. That's what I mean by saying they are anti-Jewish. There is a difference that people must remember between anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism. Anti-Semitism is hating the Jews as a people. Now, of course, that's wrong, that's abhorrent in God's eyes. Along with any kind of racism, by the way, any kind of racism is abhorrent in God's eye. And then there is anti-Judaism, which is critiquing the Jewish religion, which is a position we all must adopt, because the Jews blaspheme Jesus, they have horrible things to say about him in their Talmud, and so on. So we must be anti-Jewish, not anti-Semitic, and of course many great Jewish Christians were anti-Jewish. You don't have to be anti-Jewish to be anti-Semitic. In fact, many anti-Semitic cults, like Christian Identity, are very Judaized themselves. For example, those Christian Identity, which is an abomination, in my belief, and an embarrassment to the British Israel truth. They basically, if you don't know what it is, they basically believe that non-whites are not human beings, they were not created, descendants of Adam, they are destined to hell no matter what. The Jews are the literal spine of Cain and Satan. Now, how that goes together, I have no idea, but okay. So that's basically British Israel gone wrong. But the interesting thing to note is that those people are usually very Judaized. They celebrated Old Testament feast, they keep the Sabbath, and so is black supremacy. Many Christian black supremacist groups who also espouse anti-Semitism, because of course Jews are white, and so they believe, many black supremacist groups believe they are decided by an evil scientist named Jacob, who has created the white people with the help of Satan. Extremely idiotic stuff like that. Of course, there is the Nation of Islam, which is not Christian, but an interesting belief that there is a spaceship above the earth waiting for a sign from Allah, and what that sign was given, that spaceship will immediately exterminate all white people on planet Earth. This is the kind of disgusting things black supremacists believe, and I will return to the main topic now because I can speak about the horrors of black supremacism for hours. Um, Black supremacists are really the most abhorrent creatures ever created on this planet. Um, anyway, so the anti-Jewishness of the Gospels, um, together with the disappearance of Hellenistic Judaism during the same period, because according to most researchers today, because most Hellenistic Jews chose to accept Jesus and adopt Christianity, um, it might explain the sharp decline in Jewish evangelism during the second and third centuries. But the fact that Jewish evangelism still continued in this period shows that the anti-Jewish tendency, and I emphasize again anti-Jewish, not anti-Semitic, of the early church did not mortally destroy any efforts for Jewish evangelism, and because that anti-Jewish tendency stemmed from the Gospels, I think we must adapt this attitude, the anti-Jewish attitude, when we're preaching to the Jews. In other words, we must have the attitude of accepting Jewish believers in Jesus as true and honest believers, unless proven otherwise, of course, according to a total rejection of Judaism and of elements from the Jewish religion, both in evangelism and in our spiritual lives, in order to serve as examples for our weaker brothers that may fall into the errors of Judaization. I like the way Michael Hoffman put it in one of his books. Um, so this is kind of you know spontaneous video. So I really do not have a ready-made speech in front of me. And I'm really tired, so both my accent and my grammar can be a bit off. But anyway, I like what Michael Hoffman said in one of his books that is specifically meant for Jewish readership. He says that our attitude to the Jews should be the one of Pidyon Shvuim. Pidyon Shvuim is a Hebrew term that he used. It means ransom of captives, meaning the releasement of captives by paying ransom for them. Basically, this is what our attitude should be. We must see ourselves as the saviors who saved the Jews from their religion, from Judaism, and from the Talmud, which is the source of all evil plaguing the Jewish nation. Now, in this period, I mean, of course, the second, third centuries, we can see the start and the flourishing of a new literary genre known as, in Latin, as Contra Judaeorum, which means in English, against the Jews. Now, this genre is a genre of apologetical writing against Judaism that is intended first and foremost for Christian ears. Many of these writings started as oral sermons in churches, but those writings still hold precious information about the Jewish traditions, the Jewish customs, and about methods for Jewish evangelism. Now that is because the writers of those writings, which the most famous of them were of course Tertullian, which wrote the book that became the namesake of that journal, and John Chrysostom, which wrote the 8 homilies against the Judeans or against the Jews, which by the way I think they are classic, they are great homilies. Every Christian should read them at least once in his life. You know what? I will put the link to the first homily in the description. So those writers included in their writings practical advice on how to prove the superiority of Jesus and the Christian faith over the Jewish religion and their customs. Now the flourishing of the Contra Judaeorum literature is a decisive proof that one can write an apologetical writing, apologetical book, apologetical literature with a dual purpose, both in order to convince existing Christians about the superiority of the gospel on Judaization, and for convincing the Jews about the superiority of the Christian faith and the belief in Jesus over the Jewish religion. Now, a very important father of the church that lived in those years was Clement of Alexandria. He lived approximately between the years 150 to 215. Clement, like many other writers in the 2nd and 3rd century, have seen the church as the true Israel, and so he saw himself as part of the nation of Israel. Now, of course, this is the oldest doctrine that is being taught all over the New Testament, that we Christians are the real Israel, we are the real chosen people. Meaning, the Christians are now God's chosen, not the Jews. Okay? Now, of course, many Israelites today, many Northwestern European nations are Christian, many Northwestern European people are Christian, and so they are part of this chosen people, but the chosen people are the church. And the role of the Israelites in the flesh today is to be as part of the church, to be the leaders of the church. But they don't have a separate role outside the church, and they will never have ever again, because the church is God's new chosen people. But anyway, the interesting thing about Clement of Alexandria is that Clement reserved the term Hebrew mostly in order to denote the ethnic group which stems from the tribe of Judah, Levi, and Benjamin. You can read that in Jennifer Otto's book from 2014, Pythagorean predecessor and Hebrew, Philo of Alexandria, and the construction of Jewishness in early Judaism, so in early Christian writings. Sorry, this is a doctoral thesis by McGill, given to the University of McGill. Of course. So anyway, it also seems that Clement, like many other church fathers, used Philo of Alexandria, and in his very allegorical, I must say, um, interpretation methods, or interpretation method of the scripture, which is very, very allegorical method. Now, I think that we can use also Philo of Alexandria as well in order to show the deep, deep differences between Second Temple Judaism and Rabbinical Judaism, and so disproving the claim of the Jews that they are holding today the same religion that was given to their forefathers at Sinai, and to show the closeness of ancient Jewish writings, like the writings of Philo and the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls, to Christian doctrines and customs. Anyway, just that was all for today. And I'm very tired, so I have to go to sleep. So, goodbye. Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.